Greetings and welcome to our presentation for Science in the City 2020. Our talk today is on the Voynich manuscript. Your first question is probably, what is the Voynich manuscript? And well, it looks like this from the outside. There's no title, author, or indication to its contents at all. It's about 240 pages in length, and it's written on calfskin vellum. But once you open it up, that's when it starts to get interesting. As you can see from a sample of the text on the left of the screen here, it's in an unknown script, unknown alphabet, unknown language. We really don't know how to read this. Nobody's been able to decipher it as of yet, although many have tried. And on the right, as you can see, the text itself is absolutely filled with fantastical figures and diagrams of plants, astronomical features, and other things that we can't necessarily identify or understand what they are. So the book is really a bit of a mystery, and it has been since it was discovered in the 20th century. But let's have a look at the brief timeline of how this came to be. Well, to start off with, we know it's about 600 years old. It was radiocarbon dated recently in the range of 1404 to 1438. So we generally accept this as being a 15th century medieval manuscript of some sort. And the first time we have any written evidence of somebody owning it or possessing it is a letter that mentions Rudolph II of Habsburg had it in his possession. We would guess around 1600-ish. There isn't actually a date we could tie this to, but he was a known patron of the arts and science and had a fairly sizable library. So it seems reasonable he had that as part of his collection. It seems to have passed through his organization, if you will, and ended up in the hands of a man called Kircher. Now, there's good reason for this. Kircher, in of himself, was a bit of a science rock and roll star in his day. He was proficient in many scientific disciplines and was known to be an active researcher. And it was passed on to him with the hope that he would have a look at it. The request was, can you make any sense of this? Let us know what you think, basically. Unfortunately, there's no evidence he actually made any effort to do this whatsoever. We know it came into his possession, and after this point, it goes a bit dark for quite some time before Wilfrid Voynich purchases it from a Jesuit monastery in 1912 from a place just outside of Rome. As Kircher was a Jesuit priest, it seems reasonable that it was passed down from his library and estate and ended up inside this Jesuit institution. So Wilfrid Voynich picked up the manuscript itself along with other medieval documents in 1912, and he realized he had something fairly unique and special on his hands because it was just unknown as to what it was. And he spent most of his life trying to sell this at a fairly healthy profit. Unfortunately, he was never able to find a buyer, and it passed down to his wife's estate upon his death, and she, Ethel, sold it to a gentleman called Hans Kraus in 1961 for about $25,000. Hans Kraus himself tried to sell it for a profit for the next little while. I think his asking price was about $160,000. He didn't find any takers, so he donated it to the Rare Book Library at Yale University, where it sits to this day. So where did it come from? Most people believe it came from Italy, probably northern Italy, and there's some clues inside of the document itself. If we look at this fortress castle, we see it has features known as swallow-tailed merlons. Those are the little bits on the top of the fortification walls. And those were fairly contemporary to northern Italy around the 15th century. So that would be the same time period that the book is radiocarbon dated to. So it seems reasonable that the author, or at least the illustrator who put this diagram in, was probably aware of these types of fortification designs. And here's an image of a fortification using them from Italy. Who knows, that might have been the one he drew himself. But there's plenty of other theories around this as well. There's some theories in the origin of the Voynich as coming from Asia or China. There's other theories that it comes from the New World, due to the fact that there's some people who believe some of the diagrams of the plants inside the Voynich are New World species that wouldn't have existed in Europe at this time. And there's more modern interpretations or theories. For example, a guy called Cheshire in 2019, who also claims to have deciphered it. That hasn't stood up to scrutiny yet. Many others have also claimed to decipher it over the last century. Um, but he actually gives details as to almost the building it was written in, who it was written for, and what its contents are. He gives a very detailed theory as to its origins. Again, this is still speculation at this point, but there's plenty of ideas out there as to where this came from and what it might contain. But there's 5 general theories as to what this document may be. Some people think it might be a natural language. It's just a language we don't know about yet, and an alphabet we've never seen before. So we need to find a way to interpret that if that's the case. Some people think it's a form of a natural language, but it's enciphered or encrypted in some fashion. So if that's true, we need to figure out a way to break that encryption and be able to translate it back to its original language in order to be able to interpret it. Others think it might be some sort of an invented language, like Esperanto with its own unique alphabet and writing system. Some people think it might be a hoax. It was just made, fabricated for some reason, probably to sell at a profit to someone else, implying it contains some sort of secret or dark knowledge or something. And the last theory that I've come across on this is it's just completely meaningless doodling by somebody who had no end game, someone deranged or mentally unstable. This seems the less likely of the theories to me, but it is possible. Even Voynich himself had some theories as to its origins. I mean, the theory he believed when he bought this up until his death was that it was written by Roger Bacon. As Roger Bacon was contemporary to the 13th century and the Voynich manuscript itself was carbon dated 2 centuries later, this seems unlikely. So that is largely a discredited theory. He also believed that John Dee, the famous English mystic and crown spymaster at one point, sold it to Rudolph II, where it first appeared sort of in written records. There's very little evidence to support that as well. As John Dee would point out, what? LOL, this is almost certainly not true. But there's a myriad of colorful theories and ideas behind as to its origins. So at the University of Malta, we have our own Voynich research group consisting of myself, Dr. Layfield, Dr. Lonica Vanderplas, who is a linguist, Dr. John Abella, who works in the same department as me. He's also a computing person like myself. Our fields are AI and natural language processing, and Mr. Mike Rosner, who is he's in the Department of AI, and he also has an interest in natural language processing. So between the 4 of us, we have a pretty good skill set to try to gain more insight and understanding as to what this manuscript might be all about. So this leads us to what our talk focuses on next. Dr. John Abella is going to go on and introduce some theories around the Voynich manuscript, some of them more plausible than others, some just simply fantastical. And Dr. Lonica Vanderplas is going to talk about some of the work we've done already and some of the work in progress now, maybe some of the work we'd like to do in the Voynich manuscript. So I hope you stay tuned and watch that. Thanks.
The Voynich manuscript today can be found at the Beinecke Rare Book Library at Yale University. The manuscript has defied all our attempts at interpreting it and understanding it for over 600 years. Perhaps what has baffled researchers, scholars, and even some famous cryptographers were, first of all, the very strange script it is written in, which nobody has understood so far, and also a number of very strange illustrations contained within the manuscript. Over here, we can see what looks like is a picture of a baby dragon. The manuscript also contains hundreds of illustrations of plants or creatures. Some of these plants or creatures have been positively identified, but many remain unidentified. The manuscript also contains cosmological maps of some sort, and also bizarre scenes of ladies bathing in some sort of green liquid. Now, as with the case of all mysterious objects and phenomena, the manuscript has attracted the attention of a large number of scholars and quacks alike. Some of the scholars working on the manuscript are very respectable, and by quacks I mean people who make outlandish claims without providing evidence. The Voynich manuscript raises a lot of questions. Perhaps the most important is who exactly wrote the Voynich manuscript. Initially, many people thought it might have been Voynich himself, but it later turned out that the manuscript was radiocarbon dated to between 1404 to 1438, and this of course excluded Voynich because there was no way he could have been around then. Voynich himself liked to promote the idea that it was the medieval English philosopher Roger Bacon. Some people suspect that Voynich did this in order to increase the value of the manuscript and sell it for a tidy profit. Yet other people believe it was indeed Leonardo da Vinci himself, and perhaps more outlandish are the claims that the manuscript was written by aliens and then somehow transported to Earth. Why was it written? The most honest answer is that we still don't know why it was written. Another interesting question is the text in the Voynich manuscript. Over there on the right, you can see a sample of the actual text from the manuscript. It has not been identified yet, but there are many hypotheses. For instance, is it an artificial made-up language? Or even perhaps an encrypted natural language like Italian or Latin that was then encoded using some cipher technique? Another hypothesis is it is some unknown language that was used in the times when the Voynich manuscript was written, or even perhaps absolute gibberish. And you'll find people who subscribe to any one of those four theories. An interesting question is, does the manuscript have medical, botanical, religious, scientific, or cosmological significance? And the honest answer to that is, at this point in time, we don't know. Some people have gone so far to suggest that the manuscript may have mystical or spiritual significance. I have to point out that this is not a theory that many people subscribe to. An even perhaps more important question is, are the text and the illustrations even related to each other? In other words, if you have a page and on that page you have a picture of a dog, for example, is there the Voynich word for dog in that page, or perhaps the pages before or after? This would be very useful indeed if true. There are various Voynich hypotheses. Of course, everybody has got his own theory. But if we were to look at the main hypothesis, then these would be the following. The first one is the authorship hypothesis. Who exactly wrote the Voynich manuscript? The second one is the hoax hypothesis. Some people have claimed that the Voynich manuscript is just an elaborate hoax, perhaps perpetrated by Voynich himself, in order to make a lot of money when he sold it on. The cipher hypothesis is the manuscript written in some kind of unsolvable cipher that we have not been able to crack so far? And then we have the natural language hypothesis. There are people who believe that the manuscript may have been written in some unknown natural language. Like many things, everybody has got an opinion. Wilfred Voynich himself was convinced that it was Roger Bacon who created the artifact we now call the Voynich manuscript. As I said before, this could be because Wilfred Voynich wanted the value of the manuscript to increase so that he could sell it for a tidy profit. Then we have this gentleman here, Dan Buddish, who is a conspiracy theorist, and he is not a stranger to controversy. He claims that the Voynich manuscript was written in unciphered Hebrew by Roger Bacon again, and it describes some kind of alien technology from the future for creating DNA with sound. There are many very colorful theories like this for the Voynich. Gordon Rock, who's a respected British academic, says you can use a modified card and grill, which essentially is a piece of paper with holes in it. But when you put it on text, then you can copy the words that appear in the holes. And he said it is relatively straightforward to simulate text similar to the Voynich using this technique. He also claims that the Voynich manuscript is a hoax and has no meaning at all. Erich von Däniken, who's an author, okay, he wrote a book in 2009, History is Wrong, and he links the manuscript to the ancient Hebrew text, the book of Enoch, and a whole lot of other things. Then we have William Romaine Newbold, who was an American philosopher. He sensationally claimed that the Voynich manuscript was written by Roger Bacon in a multi-layered micrographic cipher and describes using telescopes to view galaxies. Edith Sherwood, who calls herself a Voynich revisionist, believes very strongly that the Voynich manuscript was created by a very young Leonardo da Vinci, even though he was left-handed, and some people who have analyzed the manuscript believe it was written by right-handed people. Nguyen Lan Hu Kun, who is a notorious internet poster, claims to have decrypted the Voynich manuscript, and he posted this on a Google Groups post. This gentleman has made a lot of claims in the past, so he's not taken super seriously. And finally, we have Adam D. Morris, another author who suspects that the Voynich manuscript might have something to do with an ancient German script, medieval script called Pandora. And he claims that if you were to look at the Pandora script, you will find a lot of images that are very similar to those in the Voynich manuscript. I have to say that not everybody agrees. And Wayne Herschel, another author, claims now that the star disk on folio 68R3 of the Voynich manuscript is a hidden record of a golden plate with secret writing that was given to Judas by Jesus Christ. So take your pick, decide which one you want to believe. The quest continues. The Voynich manuscript is still subject to scientific analysis and scrutiny from researchers and scholars from all over the world, and I must add a lot of other amateurs and amateur investigators. The jury is definitely not out on the authorship and the meaning of the manuscript. So there are many theories about this. And none of the main hypotheses have been conclusively validated or, for that matter, rejected. So we still don't know. And at the University of Malta, we have people from the Institute of Linguistics and also people from computer science who, together with undergraduate and postgraduate students, are investigating various lines of research. One of the problems of the Voynich is that some people take it too seriously. So Edith Sherwood, who we talked about 2 slides back, said, over the past 2 decades, study of this manuscript has seen increasing efforts made by adherents of one or another Voynich theory to actively suppress and to deter others from paying attention to any lines of research or any discoveries incompatible with their preferred theory. It seems that people who are studying the Voynich manuscript sometimes behave like some politicians who would like to suppress people expressing an opinion that they don't agree with. Now, there are a number of recommended books. An interesting book is that called The Voynich Manuscript, the Mysterious Code that has defied interpretation for centuries. I find this book interesting because it introduces the theory, the history, and a lot of very important information. It was written by Jerry Kennedy and Rob Churchill, who both have a good record creating content for BBC documentaries. As I said, it contains a detailed history and very colorful history of the manuscript and discusses in quite some detail the various hypotheses and theories that have been proposed. What is also very interesting is that Kennedy and Churchill don't hold back, and they also point out the respective holes and flaws in the respective theories. If you want high-resolution images of the manuscript, then the book The Voynich Manuscript by Clemens and Harkness is really worth a look. So there are very good reproduction of the actual pages from the manuscript. And it makes interesting coffee table reading. I have to point out that both books are available from Amazon and the Book Depository.
So what have we worked on so far at the University of when it comes to the Voynich manuscript? Well, we've been very lucky. So there were several students that have chosen to work on the Voynich manuscript for their dissertations. So one of them was Adriana Camilleri, and she actually finished with us not so long ago. And what she was looking at is, again, this hypothesis of whether the Voynich is a hoax or not. The idea behind her work was, if you look at the Voynich manuscript and you see the different pages, some have a lot of pictures about botanical stuff. So there would be things like plants, and yeah, you see example here. And others would be more about bathing, yeah, like this woman here that is bathing in this like green liquid. So what people have done is they said probably these are different topics that are talked about or that are written, that people are writing about in this Voynich manuscript. And so the Voynich manuscript have been separated in these different topics, which we also call sometimes categories. So the idea that Adriana had was that what you would expect in such a book, well, imagine it was a book written in English, you would expect that on the pages where there's pictures of trees, there would also be a lot of talking about trees and plants. And when it's about the pictures of bathing women, there would be things about water and yeah, the women inside that picture. So we expect the words that are on the pages to be dissimilar between the different categories and very similar within certain categories. And if that is the case, it would behave as a normal book. If it's not the case and just somebody just made up things and just put random words everywhere that, you know, came out of his own fantasy, we wouldn't expect that because, you know, people wouldn't be able to stick to that. They would be, yeah, more random distributions. So Adriana Camilleri actually looked at whether there was some correlation between the ways words are distributed within categories and across categories. And she found a correlation to be much higher within category than between categories. So this is what we expected, and this is what we expect if this is a real book that is trying to bring across some ideas about botanical topics and yeah, other topics such as stars and astronomy. So that was Adriana Camilleri this year in her final year report, and she decided to go on with the Voynich manuscript, even for her master. But now she's doing something completely different. She's now looking at those characters and how you can automatically transcribe them into a digital format. And we call this optical character recognition. And this is a very challenging project because, as you can see, for us as humans to do this manually is already quite difficult. So imagine what it's like to do this automatically. So we're very curious to see what will come out of that. Then there's also Matthew Valla. So he's looking more at the image side of things. So he's looking at image processing. So when you look at these pictures here and at the pages in the Voynich, you'll see that there's parts where things are broken. So there might be pages that are damaged. There's also pictures from the other side of a particular page shining through, kind of. You see that also here. These are all things that make it harder for us to analyze the Voynich, and also sometimes harder to read the characters, right? To make sense of the characters. And by trying to separate these different layers of the manuscript, we hope to be able to analyze it in a better way. There's also Kevin Farrugia, who also started this year working on the Voynich. What he's doing is a bit similar to what Adriana Camilleri is doing. So looking at the bit of what we would call the semantics, or trying to get at what, you know, the different words on the different pages mean and how they are distributed over different categories. But he's going to look at that more from a linguistic perspective. So he's going to use linguistic theory, linguistic knowledge to be able to get even closer to what these words and the distribution of these words can tell us about the Voynich manuscript. And then there's Francesca Camilleri. And what she's doing is, again, related to the pictures and the text in the Voynich, because that's what, you know, can give us some hints about what is being meant here and what the Voynich is trying to tell us. So she's looking at labels or words that are close to the pictures. And the idea here is that, yeah, if you are putting a picture of a certain plant here, as we see here, and there's a label to it, probably this label has something to do with that picture. So can we, by looking at the labels and how they're distributed and maybe finding links with other languages, find out what is meant with these labels, and can this help us decipher or understand the Voynich manuscript? Right, so here you see the final year report of Adriana Camilleri that she handed in May 2020 this year. I'm very proud of that. Okay, so there's more work that we've done. So this is work that we've done as the academics, so this was not involving any students. What we've been doing, and we have a paper that we published here, and you see it down at the bottom here. We recently published this paper, and what we did in there is we looked at sound patterns. So we were interested in what sounds follow other sounds in words. And there's a lot of psycholinguistic research about that, and some colleagues of us from the University of Arizona did some work on that. And we thought, why not try and see if the Voynich behaves the same as other languages? Because if it does, then that's another piece of evidence for us that the Voynich might be a real language and not a hoax or some deciphered language. So yeah, I'm saying sound patterns here, but you might wonder, we don't really know what it sounded like, right? All we have is these characters, and that's true. So we made the assumption that often there is a correspondence between sounds and characters, although it's not always 100%, predictable. It's not always the fact that one character always sounds the same in every language. It's pretty much, at least there is some evidence in there, and there is some information in the way the characters are put together. But maybe we should call it more like a character, sequence of characters that we've been looking at. So we compared the sequence of characters that we find in the Voynich manuscript to the sequences of characters that we find in other languages. And we try to see whether the Voynich in this respect behaves naturally like other languages, or is it a very weird language that behaves completely different? And it turned out that the Voynich behaves very much like all the other languages that we compared with, and we compared with many different languages. So yeah, for us, this is another piece of evidence that we are looking at a real language here.
Hi everybody, my name is Mike Ross and I work at the Department of Artificial Intelligence at the university, and I also have been working on the mysteries. I've been working on trying to identify what language it's written in. Now, what distinguishes Voynich from many other manuscripts is that the language in which it's written is simply unknown. What does that mean? Well, it means at least these two things. One, that the script in which it's written is unknown. We can't really recognize the letters out of which it's made. And therefore, we can also not understand what are the words. So unknown script, unknown words, an unknown language. What can we do with this? Well, even if we don't know what language it is, we might be able to find a way of relating it to languages which are known. How would we go about this? Well, the key idea that we have is to discover the correspondence between words which appear on the Voynich pages and words in a known language by matching the letters together. Of course, this is going to be complicated, but the general idea is shown on the right. So we have the German word Hund, which means dog, and we have the English word hound, which is a kind of dog. Now, if we look at these two words, it's easy to see, and it's shown by the lines, that the letters making up the words correspond with each other quite well. In fact, apart from that O, it's pretty much the same word. So there's a very high level of correspondence, 80% to be precise, between the two words. And in fact, they are both very much meaning the same thing. Now, we have this same phenomenon in many other languages. So for example, Maltese words sometimes derive from words in other languages, such as Arabic, Italian, and English, and we'll see some examples of that in a moment. The question then is, for Voynich, can we establish some kind of correspondence between words on the Voynich page and the words of other languages? Now, one of the difficulties with Voynich is that unlike the German English example, the alphabets of the two languages are different. So the word matching process must be able to handle languages with different alphabets. So it's not just a question of seeing, as we can in the German English example, which letters go with which. We have to have some rules for associating the letters of the Voynich language with the letters of the known language. Now, to give you some examples of this, we can see, first of all, on the left-hand side of this slide, we have the Greek word hydro, which is actually very similar to the prefix in English, hydro, which means, as you know, hydroelectric. It's got something to do with water. In fact, it means it's the Greek word for water. And this word, as we can see, there is a kind of correspondence between the characters in Greek and the characters in English. So, for example, the delta and the D are basically the same letter, but they're written in a different way. Another example is given by the Maltese word kelp, which, as you all know, means dog, and the Arabic word, which is also kelp. Now here, it's difficult to see what the correspondence is, partly because Arabic is written right to left, and secondly, because we can't really see the boundaries between the different characters, the different letters. So if I were to draw the lines linking the letters to the characters in English, then you'd expect to see some crossing lines because of this left to right versus right to left problem. Now, in the case of Voynich, we have even more of a problem because we don't know what language corresponds to it. So one of the questions we need to ask, and this is part of the research questions, one of the questions is, what are the most promising languages that might be candidate languages from which Voynich might be related? So I put L1 and L2 because there may be several, but the questions for us are, which languages are the most promising candidates? Secondly, if you've chosen the languages, how close is the resemblance between a Voynich word and one of the words in the language which we choose? And the third problem is, what is the correspondence between the letters, between the characters of the word? And these are all problems which we are currently working on by building computer models which take a candidate known language and look for correspondences between the Voynich characters and the characters in the known language by looking at many different rules for associating the Voynich letters with the letters in the known language. And that's quite a big computational problem for which we are looking at AI-inspired methods to solve. So that's all I've got to say for now. We've got a long way to go, but the results we hope will be promising. Thanks very much for listening.